The carriage rolled to a stop on Fifth Avenue, and through its gilded windows, a young woman caught her first glimpse of the mansion that would determine her fate. Bronze doors, each weighing 3,000 pounds, stood sentinel at the entrance. Above them, limestone facades rose 5 stories into the New York sky, carved with such intricate detail that every cornice, every balustrade, every window frame seemed to whisper a single message: power. This was not a home. This was a declaration of war. The year was 1883, and America was in the grip of what Mark Twain would famously call the Gilded Age. It was an era of staggering contrasts, where immense fortunes rose from railroads, steel, oil, and tobacco, while the working poor labored in conditions that would horrify modern sensibilities. But nowhere was the divide more visible, more theatrical, more deliberately crafted than in the mansions that lined the streets of America's wealthiest neighborhoods. These were not merely residences. They were weapons in a social war more ruthless than any fought on battlefields. Caroline Astor understood this better than anyone. As the Mrs. Astor, she ruled New York society with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves. Her ballroom on Fifth Avenue could hold exactly 400 guests, no more, no less. This number became legendary, the basis for the 400, the exclusive list of families deemed worthy of entering high society. If your name wasn't on that list, you simply didn't exist in the eyes of New York's elite. And the mansion itself served as the physical embodiment of that exclusion. Its grand staircase, designed by the celebrated architect Richard Morris Hunt, was not built for convenience. It was built for spectacle. It was built so that Mrs. Astor, dripping in jewels acquired from the French court, could descend like a queen before her subjects, shimmering like a chandelier in the gaslight, every step a reminder of who held power in this city. The architecture spoke a language everyone could understand, even if they couldn't articulate it. When you stood before one of these mansions, you felt small, you felt unwelcome. You felt the weight of centuries of European aristocracy bearing down on you, even though most of these buildings were barely a decade old. That was exactly the point. The new American millionaires, the Vanderbilts and Rockefellers and Carnegies, had money beyond imagination, but what they truly craved was legitimacy. They wanted to be seen not as upstart industrialists, not as nouveau riche opportunists, but as American royalty. And so they commissioned palaces that would make European nobility envious. Consider the materials alone. Limestone and marble were imported from quarries across Europe. Rare woods from South America lined the walls. 7 different types of marble went into a single grand hall. Bronze doors cast in the finest foundries. Stained glass crafted by masters like Louis Comfort Tiffany. Electric lights, a stunning innovation at the time. Illuminated rooms that had been designed to look like they belonged to 17th century French kings. The message was clear: we have so much money that we can afford to transport entire quarries across the Atlantic. We can afford to hire the greatest architects of the age. We can afford to wait years for construction while artisans hand-carve every inch of decorative plasterwork. The Vanderbilt family epitomized this aggressive display of wealth. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the patriarch they called the Commodore, had built a shipping and railroad empire through sheer determination and ruthless business practices. Starting with a $100 loan from his mother to run a ferry between Staten Island and Manhattan, he accumulated a fortune that would rival entire nations. But money alone wasn't enough for his descendants. His grandson, William Kissam Vanderbilt, married a woman named Alva Erskine Smith, and together they would wage one of the most spectacular social campaigns in American history. Alva was a force of nature. Born in Alabama, educated in France, she understood European culture and aristocratic manners better than most of the old money families who looked down on her. But understanding wasn't acceptance. Mrs. Astor and her circle considered the Vanderbilts unworthy of high society. Railroad money, they sniffed, was vulgar. Inherited wealth was somehow more respectable. Though the Astors themselves had only been wealthy for 2 generations, having made their fortune in fur trading and Manhattan real estate. Still, the Vanderbilts were shut out. They weren't invited to the important dinner parties. They couldn't secure one of the precious 18 opera boxes at the Academy of Music. They were billionaires living in a social prison. Alva refused to accept this fate. Her weapon of choice would be architecture. She hired Richard Morris Hunt, the first American graduate of the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, to design a mansion that would dwarf anything on Fifth Avenue. The result was Petit Chateau, a French Renaissance castle transported to New York, built at the staggering cost of $3 million. In today's money, that would be over $100 million, spent on a single house. The mansion wasn't just large, it was overwhelming. Every room was a different period piece. Italian Renaissance, Louis XIV, Louis XV. Carved woodwork covered every wall. Gilded plasterwork shone from every ceiling. The grand staircase alone was a masterpiece that took years to complete. But Alva knew that the mansion itself wasn't enough. She needed an event. She needed to force Mrs. Astor's hand. And so, in March of 1883, she announced a costume ball. Not just any ball, but the most elaborate party New York had ever seen. 1,200 guests would be invited. Young socialites practiced elaborate quadrille dances for weeks. Costumes were commissioned from the finest designers in Paris. Police had to be stationed outside to control the crowds of ordinary citizens who gathered to catch a glimpse of society's elite arriving in their carriages, dressed as everyone from Marie Antoinette to medieval knights to mythological gods. There was just one problem for Mrs. Astor. Her daughter Caroline desperately wanted to attend. She had practiced the quadrille with her friends, ordered her costume, talked of nothing else for weeks. But Alva had a ready excuse. She couldn't possibly send an invitation to the Astor residence, because Mrs. Astor had never formally called on the Vanderbilts, had never left her calling card. Without an address, how could she know where to send the invitation? It was a brilliant trap. Mrs. Astor could maintain her pride and watch her daughter's heart break, or she could swallow that pride, visit Petit Chateau, and acknowledge the Vanderbilts as social equals. She chose her daughter. The next day, an invitation arrived at the Astor residence. The ball itself became legendary. Alva dressed as a Venetian princess, dripping in jewels. Cornelius Vanderbilt and his wife came as Louis XVI and an electric light, the latter costume featuring actual working lights powered by hidden batteries. The party lasted until dawn, and when it was over, the social landscape of New York had changed forever. The Vanderbilts had won. Architecture and spectacle had breached walls that money alone could never penetrate. But Alva wasn't finished. She wanted more than acceptance. She wanted dominance, and for that, she needed something even more spectacular than Petit Chateau. She needed a monument that would stand for centuries. She found her opportunity in Newport, Rhode Island, where New York's elite spent 8 weeks every summer in what they ironically called their cottages. These cottages were, of course, massive mansions, but the term was a way of maintaining the fiction that they were simple summer retreats rather than ostentatious displays of wealth. For Alva's 39th birthday, William gave her a gift that would cost $11 million in 1892 money. Today, that would be nearly $400 million. He gave her Marble House. The name was not metaphorical. 500,000 cubic feet of marble went into the construction. $7 million was spent on marble alone. The mansion was inspired by the Petit Trianon at Versailles, but it surpassed its European model in every way. Richard Morris Hunt outdid himself, creating a Beaux-Arts masterpiece that redefined what was possible in American architecture. Walking through Marble House was like entering another world. The grand entrance hall featured yellow sienna marble polished to such a shine that it reflected like a mirror. The staircase rose through the center of the house, its wrought iron and bronze railings covered in gold, copied directly from a railing in the Palace of Versailles. Every step was calculated for maximum theatrical effect. The staircase was designed with wide, shallow rises, allowing women in elaborate gowns to descend slowly, gracefully, creating a tableau that would burn itself into the memory of everyone waiting below. A massive ceiling fresco depicting Greek gods and goddesses crowned the space, an 18th-century Venetian painting that had been carefully transported across the ocean and installed to give the brand-new mansion an air of ancient pedigree. The Gold Room, as it came to be called, was perhaps the most extraordinary space in the mansion. Every surface was covered in 22-carat gold leaf. The walls featured carved wooden panels depicting scenes from classical mythology, inspired by the Apollo Gallery at the Louvre. The ceiling bore elaborate paintings of Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom and warfare, a fitting patron for Alva. When guests entered this room on a summer evening, with the setting sun streaming through the windows and reflecting off all those gilded surfaces, the effect was overwhelming. This wasn't just wealth. This was power made manifest. This was divinity claimed by mortals. The dining room featured pink Numidian marble from Algeria, so rare that entire expeditions had to be mounted to quarry it. The chairs were gilded Louis XIV reproductions, each so heavy that footmen had to help guests sit down. This wasn't an accident. Every inconvenience, every excess, every impossible luxury served a purpose. When you needed servants to help you sit in a chair, you were reminded at every moment that you had entered a world beyond normal human experience. You were in the presence of gods, or at least people who wanted you to believe they were gods, but the intimidation went beyond the obvious displays of wealth. The floor plan itself was a carefully designed system of social control. The mansion was divided into distinct zones, each serving a specific purpose in the elaborate social theater of the Gilded Age. The public rooms, where guests were received and entertained, were overwhelming in their opulence. Every surface was designed to impress, to establish dominance, to remind visitors of their host's superior position. But behind these grand rooms lay private family quarters that were surprisingly modest by comparison. And behind those lay an entirely separate world. The servant quarters and service corridors formed a hidden network that allowed dozens of staff members to maintain the illusion of effortless luxury. Servants used separate staircases, separate entrances, separate hallways. They were never supposed to be seen unless they were actively serving. The kitchen, pantries, sculleries, laundries, and servant bedrooms were kept completely segregated from the family spaces. This wasn't just about convenience. It was about maintaining a carefully constructed fantasy. The family and their guests never wanted to see the machinery that kept the mansion running. They wanted to believe that meals simply appeared, that rooms cleaned themselves, that everything they needed materialized, as if by magic. The invisible servants were part of the intimidation. If you had so many staff that they could remain unseen despite their constant work, you had truly transcended normal human existence. The symbolism extended to every detail. Take the bronze doors at Marble House. Each one weighed 3,000 pounds. They were cast at the John Williams Bronze Foundry in New York and put on display before the mansion even opened, generating public interest and speculation. These doors weren't designed to be easy to open. They were designed to be difficult. They were meant to remind you with every ounce of effort required to push them that you were entering a space that was fundamentally different from the world outside. The threshold itself was a test. Only those with sufficient determination, sufficient social standing, sufficient worthiness could cross it. Now, if you're enjoying this journey through the Gilded Age, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We dive deep into the fascinating, often scandalous history that shaped our world, bringing you stories that textbooks often leave out. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. The competition between wealthy families reached absurd heights. When Alice Claypool Vanderbilt, wife of Cornelius Vanderbilt II, saw what Alva had built at Marble House, she was determined to surpass it. The result was the Breakers, completed in 1895. Designed by Richard Morris Hunt in his final commission, the Breakers was inspired by Italian Renaissance palaces in Genoa and Turin. It had 70 rooms spread across 5 floors. The Great Hall soared 50 feet high, supported by columns of red marble. Every room featured imported materials, marble from Italy and Africa, woods from rare forests, mosaics crafted by European artisans. The ballroom alone covered 5,000 square feet, the largest private ballroom ever built in America at that time. But size wasn't the only measure of dominance. The technological innovations embedded in these mansions were equally important status symbols. Electric lights, still a novelty, were installed throughout the Breakers. A state-of-the-art heating system used steam to warm every room. Modern plumbing brought hot and cold running water to multiple bathrooms. These weren't just conveniences. They were displays of scientific mastery, proof that the owners could afford not just the past's treasures, but the future's promises as well. The psychological impact of these mansions on visitors cannot be overstated. Imagine arriving as a guest for the first time. Your carriage rolls up a perfectly manicured drive, past gardens designed by the finest landscape architects, featuring plants imported from around the world. You step out at the entrance, where liveried footmen stand at attention. The massive doors swing open, revealing a hall that could swallow your entire house. Your footsteps echo on marble floors that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Above you, gilded plasterwork catches the light from crystal chandeliers. Paintings by old masters line the walls. Every direction you turn offers another overwhelming vista of wealth and power. You're led through room after room, each one themed differently. The Italian Renaissance library, with its leather-bound books and carved wooden panels. The French Baroque music room, with its gilded harpsichord. The Gothic dining room with stained glass windows depicting medieval scenes. You're surrounded by centuries of European history, compressed into a single American mansion built just a few years ago. The message is inescapable. Your hosts have bought and conquered time itself. They own the past, present, and future. And then you meet your hosts, descending that magnificent staircase, dressed in the finest Parisian fashions, jewels worth fortunes glittering at their throats and wrists. They greet you with practiced charm, but you can't forget where you are. You can't forget that every object in this house costs more than you'll ever see. You can't forget that an army of servants labors invisibly to create this perfect moment. You have been intimidated without a single harsh word being spoken. The house has done its work. The social gatherings held in these mansions were carefully choreographed performances designed to reinforce the social hierarchy. A typical ball might host several hundred guests. Orchestra music floated through the halls. Champagne flowed from France. Food was prepared by French chefs, earning salaries that exceeded what skilled workers made in a year. The cost of a single dinner party could have fed a working-class family for months. And everyone knew it. That was part of the point. Conspicuous consumption wasn't just acceptable in the Gilded Age, it was expected. To have wealth and not display it was seen as a failure, a sign of weakness. The dress codes for these events were equally intimidating. Women were expected to appear in different gowns for different parts of the evening. A dress for arriving, a dress for dinner, a dress for dancing, a dress for late-night refreshments. Each gown cost hundreds or thousands of dollars and was worn once, maybe twice, before being retired. The jewelry alone represented fortunes. Mrs. Astor famously wore so many diamonds that she could barely move under their weight. This wasn't vanity, it was warfare. Every jewel was a bullet in the social arms race. Men weren't exempt from the display. Their suits were tailored by the finest craftsmen in London or Paris. Their watches were works of art. Their cufflinks and shirt studs were often set with precious stones. They smoked cigars that cost more than a worker's daily wage and drank brandy aged for decades. The conversation centered on yachts and horses and European travel, topics specifically chosen to exclude those without equivalent resources. If you couldn't discuss your latest trip to Paris or your new racing yacht, you simply had nothing to contribute. The mansions also served as stages for marriages that were essentially business transactions. The daughters of wealthy American families were married off to impoverished European aristocrats in arrangements that benefited both parties. The Americans gained titles and social prestige. The Europeans gained the money needed to maintain their crumbling estates. These young women were called dollar princesses, a term that captured both the commercial nature of the transactions and their supposed elevation in status. Alva Vanderbilt orchestrated one such marriage for her daughter Consuelo. In the Gothic room at Marble House, a space designed to showcase Alva's collection of medieval artifacts, Consuelo was pressured into accepting a marriage proposal from the Duke of Marlborough. Consuelo later wrote that she found the room austere, that her mother had chosen every piece of furniture and forbidden her from bringing in any personal possessions. Even her own bedroom was a space of control and intimidation. The wedding went forward despite Consuelo's wishes. She wore a dress that cost thousands of dollars and married a man she barely knew. Also, her mother could claim a connection to British nobility. The irony was that many of these grand mansions were used for only a few weeks each year. Newport's summer season lasted 8 weeks at most. Families would open their cottages in July, staff them with dozens of servants, fill them with food and wine and flowers, host endless parties and balls, and then close them up again in September. The rest of the year, these massive structures sat empty, maintained by skeleton crews who kept them ready for their owner's return. The waste was staggering. But that, too, was part of the intimidation. Only the truly wealthy could afford to maintain houses they barely used. The architects who designed these mansions understood their role perfectly. Richard Morris Hunt, who created Petit Chateau, Marble House, the Breakers, and dozens of other Gilded Age palaces, had studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. He brought European classical principles to America, but he amplified everything. Where European palaces had developed over generations, American mansions compressed centuries of architectural evolution into construction periods, measured in months or years. Where European nobility had inherited their wealth and status, American millionaires had earned theirs in a single generation and wanted monuments that reflected their speed and power. Hunt was joined by other architectural titans of the era. Ma Kim, Mead and White designed estates for the Astors and other elite families. Peabody and Stearns created massive, shingle-style mansions. Each architect competed to create ever more elaborate, more historically accurate, more overwhelming designs. They raided the architectural vocabulary of every European culture: French chateaux, Italian palazzi, English manor houses, Gothic castles. Nothing was too exotic, too expensive, too excessive. The clients demanded grandeur, and the architects delivered. The interiors were often designed by French firms like Jules Allard and Sons, who created the rooms at Marble House. These designers worked with craftsmen across Europe, commissioning furniture, paneling, fabrics, and decorative objects that would be shipped to America and installed in homes that had been built specifically to receive them. The result was a kind of architectural colonialism, where America's new wealth allowed it to import entire rooms from European palaces, reassemble them in Newport or New York, and claim them as American achievements. The gardens surrounding these mansions were equally important in the overall scheme of intimidation. Landscape architects like Ferruccio Vitale designed elaborate grounds featuring formal gardens in the French-style, English-style woodlands, Italian terraces, Japanese tea houses, and more. The grounds of the Breakers stretched for 13 acres along the ocean. Those at Marble House featured marble pavilions and Chinese-inspired structures. Every plant was chosen for effect. Every path was calculated to provide the most dramatic views. Even nature itself was conscripted into the service of social dominance. The maintenance of these estates required small armies of workers. A typical mansion might employ 30 to 50 full-time servants, butlers, footmen, maids, cooks, kitchen staff, gardeners, coachmen, stable hands, laundresses, and more. During the social season, additional temporary staff would be hired to handle the increased workload. The rigid hierarchy among the servants mirrored the social hierarchy of their employers. The butler stood at the top, commanding respect from everyone below him. Footmen and parlor maids ranked higher than kitchen staff. Everyone knew their place, and stepping outside those boundaries brought swift punishment. The servants' lives were entirely structured around their employers' needs and whims. They rose before dawn to prepare the house for the day. They worked until late at night, serving dinner parties and balls. Their own meals were eaten quickly in basement dining halls. Their sleeping quarters were small, plain rooms tucked away in attics or basements. They used separate staircases and entrances, literally living in a parallel world within the mansion. Many servants never married, as their positions required complete dedication. They gave their entire lives to maintaining the fantasy of effortless luxury for families who barely acknowledged their existence. But the Gilded Age couldn't last forever. The very excess that defined these mansions eventually became their downfall. As the 20th century progressed, attitudes toward wealth and display began to shift. The rise of income tax, implemented in 1913, made it much more expensive to maintain these estates. The two world wars changed social dynamics dramatically. Servants became harder to find as other employment opportunities opened up. The Great Depression devastated even wealthy families. And perhaps most importantly, the public began to see these displays of wealth not as aspirational, but as offensive. One by one, the great mansions began to close. Some were demolished to make way for commercial development or apartment buildings. Others were converted to museums, their preservation dependent on public interest rather than private wealth. A few were sold to institutions like universities or were transformed into hotels. Walking through Fifth Avenue today, you can barely see traces of the mansions that once lined it. The Cornelius Vanderbilt mansion that stretched across an entire city block is gone, replaced by stores and office buildings. Mrs. Astor's townhouse was torn down to build Temple Emmanuel. The Gilded Age palaces of New York have largely vanished, leaving only photographs and memories. Newport fared better. The Preservation Society has maintained many of the great cottages, opening them to tours. The Breakers, Marble House, the Elms, and others can still be visited, allowing modern audiences to experience the overwhelming grandeur that once intimidated New York society. Walking through these mansions today offers a strange experience. On one hand, they remain breathtaking examples of architectural achievement, craftsmanship at a level rarely seen in contemporary building. On the other hand, they feel like museums of excess, monuments to a time when inequality was not just accepted, but celebrated and flaunted. The legacy of Gilded Age mansions extends far beyond their physical structures. They established an architectural vocabulary for luxury that still influences design today. The Beaux-Arts style they popularized can be seen in public buildings and private homes across America. The idea of the grand entrance, the sweeping staircase, the room dedicated to a single purpose. These concepts have been absorbed into our collective imagination of what wealth looks like. Real estate developers still use words like chateau and palazzo to sell expensive homes. Interior designers still reference Louis XIV or Italian Renaissance styles. The Gilded Age mansions taught us how to imagine luxury. They also serve as cautionary tales about the dangers of extreme wealth inequality. The same era that produced these architectural marvels also produced brutal working conditions in factories, child labor, environmental destruction, and political corruption. The money that built Marble House came from railroads that were often built with government subsidies and land grants, essentially transferring public wealth into private hands. The fortunes of the Gilded Age were built on a system that concentrated power and money in the hands of a tiny elite while the majority struggled. The mansions were symptoms of that inequality, physical manifestations of an economic system that had spun out of control. Looking at these mansions today, we can appreciate their beauty while also recognizing what they represent. They are, in the end, monuments to human ambition, both its glorious possibilities and its troubling excesses. They remind us that architecture is never neutral, that buildings make arguments about power and worth and belonging. The intimidation was always the point. The overwhelming grandeur, the impossible expense, the theatrical excess, all of it was designed to make some people feel welcome and make others feel small. That was the true function of these palaces. They were weapons in a social war, and they succeeded brilliantly at their intended purpose. The question we're left with is what we choose to remember about the Gilded Age. Do we focus on the artistic achievement, the craftsmanship, the architectural innovation, or do we remember the human cost, the inequality, the social cruelty embedded in every golden surface? Perhaps the answer is that we must remember both. These mansions are beautiful and terrible, magnificent and monstrous. They represent the best and worst of human nature, compressed into stone and marble and gold. They stand as eternal reminders that power, when unchecked and unquestioned, will always build monuments to itself. And those monuments will always be designed to intimidate. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the architecture and social dynamics of America's Gilded Age, make sure to like this video and let us know in the comments which mansion you'd most want to visit. The stories behind these walls are endless, and we're just getting started. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.